Hello, people. Welcome back to the Just Your Football Show. Apologies for being late. As you can see, I'm still on my own right now. Ben's a busy guy. Right? Ben's a busy guy. We've got to wait for him to arrive. So, like people were saying in the chat, Joe, just come on, fucking get on board, will you, and chat to us for a bit. So I'm here. Please do smash a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, get your comments in, and of course, hit that notification bell. Yeah, the screamer's gone. No more screaming. The intro has changed. Where have you been? Where have you been? Every time someone mentions it, I'm like, well, obviously, you haven't watched because it's been about 3 days now, which disappoints me, but hey-ho, we'll leave it. We'll let it is. Yes, Jack, it's live, bro. Don't worry about it. Liking and subscribing costs nothing and supports the channel. Yes, please do support the channel as well. Intro is spot on now. Love it. Yeah, great up. Listen, we're going to be talking to Ben soon. Actually, speak of the devil, and he shall arrive. Here he is. Ben, how are you? I'm loving the new haircut, by the way.
Buzz cut with the view to the summer. I will be making trips to the Euros, to Saudi, and to Los Angeles, and I'm hoping for heat in all of them. So
good stuff.
I've gone all sort of 1980s football hooligan, but I suppose by the time we get into the window, it will grow a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like a very busy summer for you then, Ben, mate. I'm not jealous at all, mate, as I just sit in this room the majority of the time, mate. So you've got it best, I think. How are you first and foremost, mate? Your team Leicester, they got promoted. You must be buzzing with that.
Yeah, I feel a bit bad coming on here and sort of gloating about Leicester because obviously had we not gone up or got a points deduction last season, then Leeds would be up. Very tough. And I've got a lot of empathy for Leeds fans. 90 points and you still don't go up automatically. If you repeat that tally, you'll be up easily next season. But from Leicester's point of view, I'm naturally very excited to see us back, but also a bit of trepidation heading into the new season because we, of course, lost Enzo Maresca, and there's still that question mark over the points deduction. So let's wait and see. Speak to me when the window shuts, and if we've still got Kiernan Dewsbury Hall, and if we haven't lost Ricardo, and if we've got a good, new, exciting manager in, then I'll be feeling confident. But ultimately, it's still a period of uncertainty for Leicester, and although Leeds didn't go up, maybe it's a little bit more stable behind the scenes than it is currently for Leicester.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, as soon as the playoff final was lost, we had the news about Red Bull getting involved at the football club, which is absolutely huge and sort of arrests any sort of noise about us having issues financially, because that obviously helps that and helps us to go about acquiring players and stuff. I want to get straight into the players that have been linked over the past few weeks or so. Yourself, actually, Ben, sort of broke the news on Alfie Gilchrist on a potential loan move to Leeds United and other clubs in the Championship, and it's one that I'm really on board with. I know he didn't play much, like 17 times for Chelsea last season, but he's well thought of at the football club. Can you just give us any sort of updates on that move for Alfie Gilchrist?
Yeah, as you can imagine at Chelsea with Enzo Maresca coming in, the players will return and Gilchrist will have a kind of one-on-one with the football staff. He'll meet Maresca, and then the feeling is that he will be loaned out to a Championship club. That's the plan. That's the player's intent, and it's very unlikely in the position that he plays that Chelsea will think otherwise. The only real question mark is kind of when in the process of the window, because as you may know, when you loan out a player and you've got a new manager, sometimes clubs like Chelsea want to take the player over first pre-season. We saw this with Ian Maatsen, who ended up going to Dortmund and may well move there permanently. But the first task was kind of bring him on the US tour, make sure that you're aware that the player feels the club still see you as having a pathway. Because Alfie Gilchrist is one of those Chelsea through and through type players that wears his heart on his sleeve. And some of that is good because he becomes a fan's favourite. And some of that can be a all-in, full-blooded, needs polishing and reining in just a little bit. So go and learn your trade in the Championship. And that is Chelsea's plan. So I'm sure he'll end up eventually over the course of the window, not today, tomorrow, but in the coming weeks at a Championship club. It might be more like late July or early August because of what I said about the pre-season and Chelsea going to America. But you've got Leeds, Preston and Blackburn, who are the three clubs that have made a formative approach so far. And to all intents and purposes, Gilchrist would be open to a Leeds move. He obviously has got great respect. I know Chelsea and Leeds have got their own kind of rivalry and all of that, but nonetheless, he would go there. He would be very willing to help Leeds fight and try and get promoted. And I think the advantage of picking a club like Leeds is that if it all goes according to plan, it's that Amari Hutchinson model, whereby in a best case scenario for the club taking the loan, you go up, the player does well, and then you feel like because of Chelsea's big squad, you might have the opportunity to try and get something permanent. From Chelsea's point of view, the opposite, straight loan. I don't think there'll be any option to buy on Gilchrist or anything like that this summer. And then they'll say, well, you know what? If he's outstanding, we bring him back and he's our player. And if he's not, then the price has risen. And if there is a deal to be done with any kind of permanence, then you have the opportunity to cash in. And I think they want to give, this is Chelsea, Gilchrist more time. So that's maybe the only downside for Leeds, that it might be a bit harder to get that permanence part in the long run. But you just never know, because we've seen this with Hutchinson, outstanding for Ipswich, and suddenly in the market. And it actually turns out, in his case, that Chelsea are willing to sell. So Leeds fans probably have to be a bit patient on that one, but they are one of 3 championship clubs very seriously in the mix for Gilchrist on, like I say, a straight loan deal.
Yeah, having done a bit of research on Gilchrist, like even through the youth setup as well, I think he was captain, you know, on a number of occasions. He's been likened to John Terry and stuff in the past. I know he played right back last season, but it makes you think that he probably may have a future at Chelsea. So I think you're right in terms of, like, if this will be a loan, it probably just will be that. If he has an amazing season, they'll probably look to bring him back, right? But I think at the end of the day, if it helps us get promoted and we only have him for a season, then it doesn't bother me at all. It's all about getting out of the division at the end of the day. A player that obviously was amazing last season, Championship Player of the Season, Crysencio Summerville. I don't think any Leeds fans are under any illusions. We expect him to be sold this summer. I seen you do a video yesterday with Fabrizio just touching on Summerville, with Liverpool, Newcastle, Chelsea all interested. Do you know what's the latest on his situation? Because I'm hearing figures of around about 45 million, 35 million, there or thereabouts for him.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be quite as high as 45 million, because unfortunately for Leeds, any suitors are trying to capitalise on this notion that they somehow need to sell around 100 million in outgoings. I'm not so sure that the number will be quite that high. Leeds sources tell me it's very difficult to give specific numbers. They've just obviously done a relatively lucrative deal in the long run with the Red Bull Group. There's acceptance within the Leeds hierarchy that there is some pressure financially to balance the books. But then again, when you look at the current financial year yet to be declared and factored in, you do have a boost on the books as far as the Adams and Sinisterra departures. So some sources within Leeds say that rather than looking at it as 100 million needed in sales, of which maybe Summerville can be a third or so of that, you should be deducting the Adams and Sinisterra things. So maybe they're not in as much financial hot water as has been painted regarding having to do those outgoings. But there's no doubt there'll be interest in Summerville, and it will be very difficult for Leeds to keep him. But what I would say, and I said this before in January as well, is the player's never been looking for the move in terms of forcing his way out. Could have had opportunities in January, wanted to stay and try and help Leeds get promoted. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realise if you don't get promoted, your assets are always under threat. And the same, obviously, if you get relegated. My club went down and immediately lost both James Maddison and Harvey Barnes. So there's that opportunity for suitors. So I think the number will be painted at the Leeds end as around 40 million, but I think suitors feel like 35 million might be good enough given the need of Leeds to sell. And then where's he going to go? Well, Liverpool are still in there and they see value. You may remember 12 months ago when Liverpool did an outstanding bit of business for Alexis McAllister, and everyone said it would be 60, 70 million, and the Brighton renewal was somehow clever and outstanding and protected his value, but it didn't, because prior to him renewing, there was that 35 million clause. And at that kind of number, we know that Liverpool like to move. So what I can tell you is that Liverpool haven't decided yet. They've made no approach to Leeds, but they want a wide player. And they're kind of doing what Liverpool do, which is succession planning, in the sense that they like to try and line up a name that can have impact in the first season, but be there for the future and have crossover with departing names, which might be a Luis Diaz or a Mo Salah. And Summerville just fits the mold of the kind of profile that they're looking for. So we wait and see if they move. I think Newcastle need to bring in money before they can start spending 35 million on a Summerville. So they appreciate the player. They're also in the conversation, probably distantly at the moment compared to Chelsea and Manchester United, for Michael Olise. And presuming that one of those clubs gets Olise or he stays at Crystal Palace, then Newcastle may pivot their attention. So let's wait and see. But we don't have a kind of unhappy player saying, I want to leave today, force my way out of the club. We have a player that's very respectful for Leeds and what they've done and the season that he's had in the Championship. But I'm sure Leeds fans also agree, probably has too much quality now to be doing another season in the Championship. So if Leeds didn't have the need to sell and raise funds, you might be saying they would have a realistic chance of persuading him to stay, because he's patient and clearly believes that Leeds are capable of going up next season. But when you factor in the finances, I do think it's likely that he departs.
Yeah, I think so as well. There's been a hell of a lot of interest in Archie Gray, Ben. Obviously, a massive talent, Leeds through and through. Every time I go on the message boards, the news, there's a new club interested. We've seen Bayern Munich, we've seen, Newcastle, we've seen Spurs of late. See, I'm of the thinking that he might stay. I sort of agree with you in terms of like one of the, or maybe even two, if we look at Nonto. We might see Nonto and Summerville leave, especially when Nonto tried to push through a deal last summer. But what are your thoughts on Archie Gray and the clubs that have been linked there? Do you think anyone will make a move?
I think people like Archie Gray, but they also realise that Leeds is the best place for him right now. And the whole Gray family are very considered in their thinking and very content to stay, even if it's another season in the Championship, because he's come through the under-21s, and ultimately one breakthrough season doesn't mean you necessarily want to jump ship when you're looking at your development. So I'm not so sure that there's that many of the clubs linked with Gray that can offer him the game time necessary for his development. Look at Liverpool, who are very close to the Gray family. And I know for a fact that player family and those around him respect people at Liverpool that have made contact with the Gray camp, particularly the chief scout at Liverpool, Barry Hunter, who's a top operator. And it's about timing, isn't it? You don't just swoop in and take the player, because he's not only going to be thinking about money or Leeds' situation, he's going to be working out how much game time he's going to get. And with, for example, Bayern or Liverpool or many of these other clubs linked at 18 years of age, not even 19 until March 2025, does he get enough game time and development compared to the learning on the job and learning the hard way and learning the smart way, playing 40 plus games for Leeds United next season? And I think suitors are playing the long game. So I would be relatively surprised if the clubs being mentioned, particularly Liverpool, come in right now for this kind of move, unless they're prepared to sign him in order to own him and get ahead in the race, and then loan him back to Leeds United. Because how many games would he play next season under Arne Slot at Liverpool? So sometimes the links come from the fact that the suitors are genuinely working on the deal, because you don't pull off these kind of top talents unless, first of all, there's opportunism and the price is right, and second of all, you've played the long game. So Gray is not of the mould to rush or be rash or be drawn in by big money moves that might actually set his career back, because he only ends up playing 5, 6, 7 times. There's got to be a pathway there. And as I say, the best place for him, in my opinion, although that doesn't matter in this context, but in the Gray family's opinion, is still ultimately at Leeds United. So it's going to take something pretty special or pretty urgent, financially speaking, from Leeds' perspective to change that.
That's that's given me sort of confidence, but at the same time, when you mentioned you knew for a fact that they'd obviously been conversations. You mentioned Barry Hunter, their chief scout at Liverpool and stuff. Maybe that's one to kick the can down the road. But I think Leeds United fans are smart enough to know that this kid, if he does fulfill his potential, will be playing for what we consider a top 6 club. If Leeds don't get the skates on and get Champions League football very soon, which I don't think's on the immediate horizon for sure. I want to get your thoughts on Joe Rodon as well, Ben, because obviously it took quite a lot of Leeds fans by surprise when he signed it. Well, it wasn't so much he signed a new deal, but they triggered the extension, did Tottenham. What do you think the reasoning behind that was? Is it a case of, right, okay, he's had a good season at Leeds. Do we then loan him back there this time with an obligation or an option to buy? Like, how do you think that one will work? Because do you know if there's any suitors for him? Because I look at it and think, could an Ipswich, a Southampton, those that have just been promoted, maybe even a Leicester have a look at him? I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think Leicester are not interested. That's one thing that I've been told pretty clearly. I think the extension was partly, as you say, down to a good season and partly as a protection mechanism, because then you're in a position where if suitors come calling, you've got all of the cards. Ultimately, whether that has an option of permanence or if it is just another loan. There's some talk that Jose Mourinho might try a move to bring Rodon to Turkey, and there's an element of substance to that. And Mourinho was asked about it, and I don't know whether you saw the press conference, but when he was basically pushed on, are you going to take any ex-Roma players? He said, I've got zero interest in any ex-Roma players that I worked with, particularly, obviously, Romelu Lukaku. But when he was pushed on other links, he was a little bit more coy. So there may be something that develops there. But this is kind of driven, I was told, by Ange Postecoglou rather than necessarily anyone on the recruitment side. And often with these sort of deals, we hear about the manager this and the manager that, and it's never the manager. It's a collaborative recruitment process. It's always the others behind the scenes, even though sometimes when we write it or when we broadcast, we inadvertently attribute things to manager when we all know that the manager's just one key part. But in this particular instance, I am told it's about Ange Postecoglou, and Postecoglou watching a lot of the games and the footage and realising that the player is naturally not old in any way. 6'4", height is an advantage, still in the mid-20s, like I say. So why not just protect it? And then ultimately it's win-win, because you can either sell him, loan him out, which would be a third time, although the Rennes loan was only, I think, 15, 16 games and didn't go particularly well. So Tottenham are just doing what you would expect, which is making sure that they've got the depth if they want to use him and making sure they've got the protection if they want to loan or sell him. And that does put Leeds at a bit of a disadvantage because he played well enough and obviously regularly enough. You'll know more than me, but I think he ended up with around 50 odd appearances in all competitions. So that's integral. That's every single game featuring and appearing. But I think there will be some interest from the Premier League and abroad. We already mentioned the Mourinho links as well. So it does make it a lot harder now for Leeds to either bring him back or try and get him on a permanent deal. And if it becomes about permanence, it's even harder for Leeds, obviously, because they're thinking about outgoings. So they don't kind of have that budget to immediately move. So it's a shame, really, because I think Leeds would have been planning for the possibility that they could find a way of keeping Rodon, and now it looks like there's going to be other suitors.
Yeah, it's going to be a different one. I think we're all aware, and there seems to be a few links anyway, sporadically coming out about centre backs potentially Leeds could have a look at. Obviously, we were all shocked yesterday, Ben, by the news of Brendan Aronson coming back to the football club. I know you have a tendency to work on the American side of things as well. Obviously, Brendan Aronson took a lot of us by surprise. We had these loan clauses previously. It seems like some of them have ran out, if you like. So I just wanted to pick your brains on Rasmus Christensen, because he, for me, when I look at the players who were out on loan with the loan clauses, is another that maybe struggled for game time and didn't do as well when he was at Roma. There's been no noises, but I just think with Brendan now agreeing to come back to the club, could we see something similar with Rasmus? Because he didn't have a great time out in Italy, and I think he's been called up to the Euros with Denmark, so maybe he waits to see if he has a good Euros and see what suitors he's got then. But I just wondered if you knew anything about the other loan contracts and if we could see anyone else return.
Yeah, not a massive amount to really add on that front. Like you say, it's gone quiet. There's not a great amount of movement. I think that Leeds were planning without rather than with. And this is the knock-on effect, unfortunately, of going down. There were all of these different and complicated, and with some players, disputed clauses. And it got to the point where there was a heavy amount of outgoings. And now they're having to resolve those outgoings without Premier League football. And I think there would have been a possibility of a return and a long-term future if Leeds had got to the Premier League. But in that particular instance, it's more a case of what happens over the summer, and can the value be raised over the summer, and can they find a permanent suitor? That's what I'm told. Whereas, as you rightly say, with Brendan Aronson, it looks like the return is going to be with a view to the long-term future. And I think with Aronson, there's no longer any sort of bad blood or anything that would stop Leeds and Aronson moving forwards, despite what's kind of happened in the past. So Aronson is now open to staying at Leeds, and that is after, to my knowledge anyway, a direct conversation with Daniel Farke. And I think you'll see a different kind of Aronson return, who is hungry and is intent on being a leading figure in Leeds United going back up, rather than any suggestion that he'll return. And then obviously people will be looking and there'll be a whole summer saga over the situation. I think that the only question mark is obviously that the active release clause post Leeds' original relegation could have allowed him the opportunity to go somewhere out on loan again. So Aronson's priority has been to settle that and effectively dismiss that clause and say, no, I'm committed to Leeds. And the whole point now is to be a very Leeds-driven leadership type player that can, on and off the field, get Leeds United back up. So yeah, we know.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so just to clarify, obviously, with regards to that loan clause, is that something now that then Brendan said, look, forget it, it's done, I want to stay at the football club?
Well, my understanding, these clauses are complicated, but my understanding is when Leeds went down, the ability for him to go on loan kicked in. And then by Leeds not going up, the clause rolls and remains active, which means that he had the opportunity to go again on another loan or return to Leeds. And he's decided to return to Leeds, which is good, because even though it was quite difficult for him at Union Berlin to begin with, I think he was excellent in the second half of the season for them. And he ended up appearing in the vast majority of their important games. But he's decided that what he wants to do is come back to England and play regularly for Leeds. And he thinks that it's better to settle the future, return to the parent club, have a good season in the Championship, be integral in the Championship, get Leeds promoted, and then ultimately you're in 2025, 2026, and he's a Premier League player heading into the 2026 World Cup. There's a real feeling as well within the US men's national team players. I don't know if you saw the other night, even though they got hammered against Colombia in a friendly, but all 11 of their starters, I think for the first ever time, were playing in Europe's top 5 leagues. And Aronson doesn't want this uncertainty heading into the build-up to the World Cup. He wants to go back to his parent club. And of course, if Leeds don't get promoted next season, he can assess it and he can probably get a move to a top division in one of Europe's top 5 leagues. But for now, he's very Leeds focused. And I would expect him to prove to be on and off the field, integral player.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, he sort of split the fan base. I think any player that's returning off of this loan clause are seen as deserters, etc. But I'm of the thinking that he will be a success next season. And like you said, he's probably prioritised game time and getting himself ready for for the World Cup, because since he's come to Leeds, he's dropped out of the 11 in America in the USMNT team, and it hasn't gone great. So hopefully this is a chance for him to get his career back on track. I just wanted to ask a quick question. Obviously, Leeds United seen a lot of their business last summer be done in England. We took loans from Spurs, Jed Spence, Rodon. We got Ampadu in from Chelsea. Do you have a clue as to where we'll be targeting this time? Because obviously we've now had our recruitment team in, Greta Steinson, Nick Hammond, Jordan Miles, Daniel Farker. We're seeing a lot of links from like the Bundesliga, Germany and Holland and stuff. So I just wondered if you had any clue as to which areas Leeds will be targeting.
Yeah, I don't think it's about the areas so much as the value. They can't go and do big business. We know for Aronson, for example, part of the division amongst the fan base was the price tag, right? 25 million from Leipzig. And when you spend like that for a club like Leeds anyway, you expect a return. Whereas now I think they're looking for value. They're fishing around the market for these under 5 or certainly under 10 million pound players contingent upon various outgoings. So you have to go into different markets. And there's sort of two priorities for Daniel Farker. One is players that can drop straight into the Championship, and naturally if they are either based currently in the United Kingdom or have experience in English football, then that helps because you're not worried about them having to bed in. You don't have time to bed in the Championship. You need a more experienced, a slightly older potentially kind of player. So instead of going for 18 to 21, they're looking at 22 to 26, and that's where again a player like Rodon is absolutely perfect. I think that they are going to be looking, from what I'm told anyway, in the Dutch market as well. And there is some substance to the links, for example, with Kohab Dirk, who is one to watch over the coming weeks and is a very talented, again, early 20s type player. The problem there is just price. Again, it might not seem like a big fee because Leeds is a big club used to paying 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 million for players over the course of the last however many years. But right now they're looking to do deals for under 5 million, and it can be a stumbling block at times because they may want to bring in 3 or 4. So this particular player is a winger. It's an area where Leeds would still like to strengthen, and it could be a very smart bit of business if they're able to get it over the line. But at the moment, nothing is advanced and nothing is agreed. But it shows you that they're not only fishing around familiar ponds, they're looking in some other European markets, but they need to find value. Otherwise, they'll move on very quickly because it is unfortunately going to be about outgoings first. What kind of budget is left over? Because the last thing they want is to be in a position like Leicester where they have a good season, they make a few shrewd signings, they hit that 90-point mark, but then there's PSR breaches. And unlike Leicester, they can't defer the penalty. And then you suddenly find that 90 becomes 85 or 80. And before you know it, you're back in the playoffs again.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree. From your perspective, Ben, I know you need to shoot soon, but do you think the Euros is going to hamper any sort of transfer? Just not even just Leeds United, but just the wider footballing world. Will we see, because obviously the window opens on Friday, I believe, the 14th, the same day the Euros happens. We've got a full month's worth of football from the 14th of June to July. Will that have any bearing on the transfer market in terms of incomings and outgoings? Because I assume a lot of players are like, switch off my phone, I don't want to know about anything until after the Euros. Do you think that'll have any impact at all?
Not necessarily. I mean, the Euros will raise the value of certain players. It's not relevant to Leeds, although very loosely when they were in the Premier League, they were tracking someone, say, like Amanda Broja. And he didn't do well at Fulham on loan. And then off he goes with Albania to the Euros, playing in that group of death, of course. And if he gets a few goals, then you get a few more bob for him. And of course, there's other players that will delay. But it's not just the Euros. You've got Copa America. For some, like Michael Elise, you've got the Olympics as well. So players are going to have to work out when the right time is for them to move. And I think this is why today the big news, Benjamin Sesko staying at Leipzig. There was a lot of hype about Arsenal, Manchester United, Chelsea. But I was always told that this staying was quite a likely option. And part of that is down to the lucrative new deal and this gentleman's agreement he can go in a year's time. But part of it's also just down to the fact that why rush leaving when you're young and playing well for your club and you're heading straight into a Euros? Why not do the Euros? And then if you've done well, people won't forget that. And then in a year's time, they'll still come calling at roughly the same wage and roughly the same price, because he's only extended by a year. So in a year's time, he'll be back where he started. There might not be a formal release clause, but it'll be the same kind of valuation. So I think you're going to see two things, which is very normal for a window anyway. One is if clubs have pre-lined stuff up, they'll move in the next few days, and you'll start to see incomings and outgoings announced quickly before the Euros. Then if the players are involved in the Euros, absolutely, it's going to be very difficult for them to resolve their future whilst they're away on international duty. But then they'll come back, and you've still got to factor in the younger kind of player. And if you're Leeds, you're perhaps looking less at an established Euros player that's going to have their value rocketed if they do well. And you're more maybe thinking about a younger player playing at the Olympics. So they might be able to do some business now before that tournament starts. And again, the Copa America, when that finishes, if you're going in that particular part of the world. So I don't think we're going to see a big impact in terms of the Euros stopping deals getting done. But I think the challenge for a club like Leeds is that anyone that does well, if they're playing on that kind of stage or the Olympic or Copa America stage, the value is going to skyrocket if they do well. So if Leeds are in the mix for that type of player, it's not always as impetuous or as rushed as people think. It's never like they scored 5 goals in the Euros, now we're moving for them. If you move for them because they've done well at the Euros, they were always on the radar beforehand, and maybe you just want to wait and see and how do they perform in the international stage. So then that's the challenge for Leeds, that if anyone who was already on their list for after the Euros or these other tournaments becomes a more concrete target, then if they do well, the other suitors that may circle or the price that may hike up and become inflated becomes a problem for Leeds, because they are genuinely counting the pennies.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Jack's just said there, Sesko to RB Leeds 25-26. That'd be
You never know.
No, yeah, exactly. But you make a good point, though, when you make that reference, because I remember Leeds United almost signed Gvardiol, and he decided to stay at Red Bull, and then look at him now, he's at Manchester City winning Premier League. So it's mad how these things go. Well, Ben, is there anything else you would like to share? Anything you would like to leave us with before you depart?
Yeah, there's a few other things. I think, first of all, this agreement with Red Bull has had mixed reception because, of course, financially speaking, people think that it adds to the infrastructure and the funding, but they worry about whether Leeds could be a feeder club. And I don't need to tell you listening, Leeds will never be a feeder club. It doesn't matter if they're in the Championship and Leipzig are playing in Europe. They'll never be a feeder club. It's as simple as that. Bigger club than Leipzig, and I mean that as no disrespect to Leipzig. It's just the fact that the Red Bull model doesn't really allow for big elite clubs, because in a success case for Leipzig and Salzburg, the players eventually move somewhere else. And ultimately that means that if Leeds are to have a long-term relationship with Leipzig, you get yourself in the Premier League and then you become bigger. But right now, you got to look at the relationship as separate, and Leeds not being in any way bound by the Red Bull Group or its model. And if they do business either way with the Red Bull Group and Leipzig in particular, then it's going to be on merit. It's not going to be because they're forced. It's not going to be because they're fed anything. It's not going to be because Leeds are suddenly going to be scoped as being a breeding ground for talent that will be sold. So if we take, for example, the Summerville example, right now it's only Leeds' financial situation that could force a sale. If you remove that, then the Leeds strategy would be, no, of course we're keeping hold of Summerville if we can afford to, and then he's going to get us promoted. Whereas the Red Bull model would be, Summerville's hit a point where we can maximize the value, so we're open to offers. So the Red Bull clubs are part of ultimately a selling model that's kind of win-win, because you cash in on your real successes, but you try and hold on to them as long as possible. And that means that they have good value on the field, which again is why it's to be celebrated for them that Sesko will do another year. But he'll still eventually go, right? And they'll cash in. So they've cashed in on the field, but they know their long-term model is to sell, whereas Leeds' long-term model is to buy. And anybody that thinks in any way, shape or form that Leeds United will ever be a feeder club to anyone is nuts, because they're one of the biggest brands, clubs, fan bases in the world. It's ridiculous to think that 49ers Enterprises would enter into any kind of conversation where Leeds is not the number one. And as soon as they get back in the Premier League, hopefully next season, they become a completely different proposition in relation to the Red Bull clubs. There are names, if Leeds become Premier League, that are appreciated. And I don't know if we spoke about this a year ago, but one, for example, before this deal, so we're not talking about any links, but Amadou Hadara was a name that Leeds really liked. 26-year-old midfielder, Malian international, been at Leipzig since 2019, could be moved on, lot of experience, would probably only go to a Premier League club. It's that kind of name, it's that kind of profile. Maybe in 12 months, by the time you get in a position where Leeds are hopefully back in the Premier League, he's a year older. But there's others like, I think, Lois Openda has been looked at by Everton and Crystal Palace before, only now new to Leipzig, or relatively, he's only been there for a season. But when he was at Lens, this was the type of profile that Premier League clubs were looking at as well. So I would see it as quite beneficial, because if you get in your head that Leeds are the number one, and it's not really a football relationship that has them sitting in multi-club, because Parag and 49ers are calling the shots. So it's not like Red Bull are saying we're muscling in and we want any kind of influence. But if you look at it more informally and you say, take what Red Bull think out the equation, because they want to keep hold of these players, especially somebody like Lois Openda, and think what Leeds want. If Leeds ever then want the business, they'll have an advantage because they've got that relationship. And obviously, if the player feels like he wants to move and the Red Bull group feel like they're going to sell, then you've suddenly got an advantage. And they're not easy to do deals with, in the sense that if the player can be persuaded to have one extra year or pathways, they stay a bit longer. But the bottom line is Red Bull is a selling model eventually. So if the player outgrows the club, then they're not always easy to negotiate on price, but there's not always that roadblock of just saying, no, we're not selling. And that could prove in the long term to be an advantage to Leeds. At the moment, you've got to get back in the Premier League. And then there's a calibre of players there that have played in European football, that have done well for Leipzig. And there might be some crossover. There might be some business to be had. But I think the big thing I get speaking to my 49ers Enterprises sources is that this is not about Leeds entering into a swamp with other clubs where they're going to be ranked. This is about Leeds being Leeds and Red Bull being Red Bull. And if there's commercial crossover or football crossover, so be it. But Leeds are never going to be seen by 49ers Enterprises as anything than an elite number one club. And as we saw when they dropped even lower than the Championship and we're getting 30,000 fans and 10,000 fans traveling to some away games and stuff like that. Leeds is Leeds. And whatever level they play at, they're always going to be a number one club. So I don't think there's any fears of feeder that will ever materialize.
That's good. That's music to my ears. And like you say, it is I guess a good relationship to have, because if it's between us and another club, they're going to opt to sell to Leeds United, aren't they? Because obviously they have that working relationship, if you like. So yeah, you've done a lot there, Ben, to make a lot of Leeds fans happy there at the end of the video. I can assure you of that. Ben, I will say thank you as always for coming on and joining me. I know you're a busy guy here, there, and everywhere. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely evening. I'll hopefully speak to you again very, very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to hearing some of your shows during the summer. And again, good luck to Leeds. I know as a Leicester fan, I should, like we said at the start, be boasting about Leicester going up. But I would have loved to see Leeds come up. I'd love to see Leeds back in the Premier League. And I'd love to see Leeds back challenging at the top of the Premier League. So as long as Leicester win the Premier League and Leeds are second, and then we'll both meet in the Champions League final, I'll be happy. Maybe I'll let you win one of the finals if we win. Anyway, good catching up, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone.
Cheers, Ben. Thank you very much. There we go. That was the fantastic Mr. Ben Jacobs there, giving us as much as he can. Listen, thanks to everyone that watched. We're not going anywhere, though, so please do smash a like on the video, please, because I've seen the amount of likes was pretty small, but I guess you were all enthralled and engrossed because you can listen, right? You can listen, you can hear. I thought what was quite interesting, obviously, we seem to get a little bit of a scoop on Gray in the You know, Barry Hunter, Liverpool chief scout, apparently has had conversations with the Gray family about a prospective move somewhere down in the future, which was quite interesting. So I think a lot of Leeds fans are aware as well that, you know, Leeds will eventually lose Gray. Unless we do get Champions League, or is that too wild of a statement? I don't think so. Joe Rodon could be a difficult deal to get done. Naturally, he's played well at Leeds United. If clubs are in for a centre-back, I wish my camera would stop moving up and down. Let me see if I stay still. It sort of follows my eyes. My eyes must start around like madmen, I think maybe that's it. Yeah, so there was that as well. What else did we touch on? I made some notes as we got Gilchrist. Obviously, Gilchrist. I think we'll get Gilchrist done. It's a matter of when, not if, for me. I think Alfie Gilchrist will be up for the move. He'll probably spend pre-season or large parts of it with Chelsea. They'll look at it and say, "Yeah, look, we can move him on, send him out on loan, like they did with Ian Matson, for example, who then went to Dortmund. Now he's going to get a permanent deal after playing in the Champions League." You know, Summerville again, good news. People were mentioning this earlier. Summerville hasn't or isn't pushing through a move, which leaves the ball in Leeds United's court in that respect, because you've got a player there that isn't pushing through a move and saying, "Get me out of the football club." So what that does is put all the cards close to Leeds United's chest, right? So that they can demand a transfer fee, as opposed to thinking, "Listen, we need to get this saga done because he's kicking up stuff and he's refusing to train, yada yada yada." It's quite quiet on the Nonto thing. That's why I didn't really ask him about Nonto. Obviously mentioned potentially looking in European market. Big up to Lockie, just for bargains really. But yeah, listen, there was loads in there. I hope you enjoyed the show. It's good to get Ben on. Yeah, do you know what? It's Euros around the corner, aren't they, as well? Exciting times. You can follow it all. Road on to Turkey is picking up, says Jack. Well, it was quite interesting. He said, "I don't know if you've seen the Mourinho stuff." I didn't see it. Might have to try find it, where Mourinho was asked in a presser about old players from Roma and then asked about other players, and he was pretty candid on it. So maybe there is something in that. I hope not. But then again, look, I've said this before. People won't want to hear it. There are a lot more Rodons out there. Just on Max Vober, he won't stay. He's got too many suitors, will have too many suitors, and will probably have a good Euros for Austria being a starting centre-back for them. I think that's where Rasmus will try and increase value as well, and Leeds United will make a decision at that point, if he's had a good Euros, that they can then protect that value, because they couldn't on Aronson. But what also was quite interesting on Brendan, he said Brendan had forgoed the clause. Said, "Forget the clause, let's do it. Wage reduction, I'm staying at Leeds United." And maybe he sees that as the best option for him going into the World Cup in America. So he's made a smart career move. So I like that. You know, I do like that. Loads in there. Thanks always for watching, as I say. Please do smash a like if you're new here. Subscribe as well. Get your comments in, hit the notification bell, and I'll probably see you tomorrow. That'll be it for now. I'll leave this to sit for a bit. Loads in there. Thanks always for watching. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm going to go chill out now. Peace out. Love you all, man. Thank you again, Ben. Peace.